What's up, kings and queens? It's your boy Dan from Daft Previews, and we're here once again for another comprehensive preview on all the key NBA props for this upcoming slate. There's 11 games. I'm going to do my absolute best to make sure this video does not go for 2 hours. We had a lot of success in our last video. I personally went 5.2 units profit on all the bets that I shared. I know a lot of you guys would have done your own research based off what I was doing and made your own picks, so hopefully you guys had some winners as well. Back at it again. I'm going to share my screen. We'll go through outlier.bet. We'll go through all the key players, their props, their matchups, and I'll call out anything that pops to mind. Now, let's go. So kicking things off with the Brooklyn Nets versus the Orlando Magic. We've got Cam Thomas, who's a game time decision for the Nets, and Paolo Banchero is a game time decision, as well as Jonathan Isaac for the Orlando Magic. So we've got limited lines available at the moment, but we'll go through what we've got. Starting off with Banchero, if he does play, at least you'll have all the research that you need. In terms of his points prop, his line's at 21.5. Got a difficult matchup. The Nets allowing the fewest points to power forwards on the season. Banchero's hit this in 5 out of his last 10 games. And up against the Brooklyn Nets, he's gone under in 3 consecutive games. Just checking to see what the issue is with Banchero, and it looks like he's suffering from an illness. So if he is sick, is he going to be able to push through and score those points? So looking at that, knowing what we know, I would probably lean to the under for his points prop at the moment, but you'd have to dive in a little bit further. Looking at his assist prop, we know that he has been doing this quite well over his last 10. Problem is his last 3, he hasn't hit. So 7 out of his last 10 he's covered. Difficult matchups against the Nets, who allow the 4th fewest assists to power forwards. And in head-to-head matchups, he did have 8 assists the last time they played. In that game, the Brooklyn Nets won by 28 points, and he still racked up 8 assists, but he did go under in the 3 games prior. Then looking at his rebounds prop, the line's at 7.5. He's covered in 2 out of his last 10. Again, a difficult matchup against the Nets, and he's hit this in 2 out of his last 4 games against the Nets. So I personally, given that he's a game time decision, he's struggled against the Nets in the past, I don't know, I'd probably lean to taking his under in his PRA, or even just his under in points, really. But I doubt he'll be as effective in this game as he was the last time they played. It is a difficult matchup, and if he is sick, it might be difficult for him to back it up. So that's a lean for now. Michael Bridges, or Mikal Bridges, Mr. Bridges. His line's at 20.5. He's covered in 5 of his last 10. He has a difficult matchup against the Orlando Magic. Pretty good defensive team. 5 of his last 10, but he's covered this in 4 consecutive games against the Orlando Magic, including a 42-point outing the last time they played. So if you're big into how teams play against certain teams, definitely the over's the go. Based off his last 10, I couldn't tell you, but at least you've got the head-to-head history on your side. His assist prop, the line's at 3.5. He's got a difficult matchup. He's covered this in 6 out of his last 10, and he's covered in 1 of his last 4 games against them. Looking at his rebound prop, 4.5 plus money, but he's only hit in 3 of his last 10. He has a difficult matchup, and against the Magic, he's gone over his rebound line in every single game. So points and rebounds, he's gone over in every single game against the Magic. His form has been a bit patchy over his last 10. But look, I never bet on Mr. Bridges, so I'll leave that up to you. We'll check out Dennis Schroeder, starting point guard now for the Nets. His line's at 13.5. He's covered in 4 out of his last 10 games. He's got a difficult matchup, and he's yet to play the Orlando Magic since the trade. Looking at his assist prop, his line's at 5.5. He's gone under this in 9 out of his last 10 games, and he's got a difficult matchup. So, but look, if Cam Thomas is out, he might see a higher usage rate perhaps, but he does have 1 less scorer to pass to. Let's have a look at Nick Claxton. His points props at 11.5. He has covered this in 4 out of his last 10. He's got a somewhat decent matchup. It's not an easy one, but it's not a hard one either. But he's covered the 11.5 in 4 out of his last 10 games. Against the Magic, he's covered in 2 out of his last 5, but he has gone under in both of the games this season. And looking at his rebound prop, the line's at 9.5. He's covered this in 4 out of his last 10. The matchup's not good or bad, and he's only covered in 2 out of his last 5. So he's struggled against the Magic in both points and rebounds the last 2 times he's played them this season. So you probably lean to the under in that regard. But what if Banchero doesn't play? That does change a few things. So I wouldn't bet on this game until the lineups are really decided. I'd have to say if Banchero is playing, I'd probably lean to take the under on that one. Probably my favorite prop. Bridges, great history against the Magic in the past, but I'll leave that up to you. The next game we're looking at is the Golden State Warriors versus the Washington Wizards. So for the Wizards, Landry Shamet, Denny Advia, game time decisions. Corey Kispert's a game time decision as well. I think if those guys are unable to go, Jordan Poole might get promoted back into the starting lineup. But let's go through the props that are available. So for the Wizards, only Kyle Kuzma props are available at the moment. So let's have a look at Kuzma. His points prop is at 22.5. The matchup's not good nor bad against the Warriors. He's covered in 5 out of his last 10. In his last 2 games against the Warriors, he has struggled, scoring 16 and 7 points. Looking at his assist prop, his line's at 3.5. He's covered in 4 out of his last 10. He has a great matchup against the Warriors. He's gone 5 and 3 in his last 2 games against them. Then looking at his rebounds prop, line is 7.5. Seems very high. He's covered in 3 out of his last 10. But he has rebounded very well against the Warriors in the past with 11 and 9 rebounds. So he does have a good matchup there. I personally, out of all these players, the rebound prop is the one I'd probably like the most. And that is if Denny Advia is unable to go, then yeah, I'd probably take Kyle Kuzma overs and boards. All right, looking at these Golden State Warriors, we'll have a look at Andrew Wiggins first. In terms of his points prop, he's lined at 13.5. He's covered it in 4 consecutive games now. He's got a good matchup like most of the Warriors players. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10, and he's had a bit of success against the Washington Wizards in the past, scoring 14 and 29 points. He was playing a lot more minutes then, 31 and 38 minutes. Over his last 10, he's playing 27 minutes per game. So not getting the same number of minutes, but I would probably lean to the over in this one, given the matchup. Looking at his rebound prop, that's at 4.5. He's got an excellent matchup. He's covered this in 4 out of his last 10 games, and he covered in 1 of his last 2 games against the Wizards. So probably a points prop for Wiggins. I'd probably lean to the over. I wouldn't touch his rebound prop. Jonathan Kuminga, now his points prop's been dropping every single game. The last time he played, it was 16.5. He's gone over that, but he has a great matchup today. So line's at 17.5, and I feel like that's probably an appropriate line. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10. Scored 22 points the last time he versed the Washington Wizards. Looking at his rebound prop, his line's at 5.5. He's covered in 5 of his last 10. I would rebound against the Wizards in the past, so I don't like that for Jonathan Kuminga. The man, Steph Curry. His points line's at 27.5. He's covered this in 5 out of his last 10. Excellent matchup. And in head-to-head matchups against the Wizards, scored 41 and 30 points the last 2 times he's played them. Looking at his assist prop, the line's at 5.5, and you can get that for plus money. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10 games. Got a great matchup. Had a 7 assists the last time he played the Washington Wizards. Jumping into his rebound prop, his line's at 4.5. That's plus money as well. He's covered this in 3 out of his last 10, but his rebounds have really slowed down over his last 5. And he's hit this in 1 of his last 2 games against the Washington Wizards. So he does have a great matchup for every single prop. He's got some good odds if you take his rebounds or his assist prop, but his form is all over the place. I honestly can't see any reason why he would need that type of output in this game. Podziemski. Jesus, my Lord, I screw this name up every single time it comes up, but hopefully over time I'll get better at it. His points props at 12.5. He's covered in 4 out of his last 10. He's got a good match. Scored 10 points the last time he played Washington. His assist props at 4.5. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10. Great matchup. Had 5 assists the last time they played. And then looking at his rebounds prop, his line's at 7.5 plus money, but he's only hit that in 3 out of his last 10. He's got a great matchup, and he had 7 rebounds the last time he played the Washington Wizards. Played 28 minutes in that game, and he's averaging 31 minutes per game at the moment. So I think the line of 7.5 is just about right. I'd feel confident taking him at 6. If you take it down to 6 for your parlays, perhaps, he's hit that in 5 consecutive games now, and 8 out of his last 10. Having a look at Draymond Green, points props at 8.5. He's covered this in 4 out of his last 10 games. Of course, he's got a great matchup against the Wizards. He only scored 4 points the last time they played, 17 points prior to that. His assist prop is at 5.5. He's gone under in 5 consecutive games, hitting in 3 of his last 10. He's covered in both of his last head-to-head matchups against the Washington Wizards. And looking at his rebounds prop, excellent matchup once again. He's covered in 5 out of his last 10. The line's at 7.5. But he has struggled against Washington in the past. So looking at this game, maybe Wiggins points, potentially Podziemski rebounds. I don't mind. But I'm waiting to see Marvin Bagley numbers. I've been betting on Marvin Bagley for a couple of games now. I think if his rebound prop is still at 7.5, I'll take that. but after his last performance, chances are it moves up. So I'll be waiting till then. Given the game time decisions, I probably wouldn't make any bets on this game just this yet. We're having a look at the Dallas Mavericks versus the Cleveland Cavaliers. Now, firstly, for the Dallas Mavericks, Luka Doncic, Josh Green, Derek Lively, Maxi Kleber, Dante Exum, all game time decisions at the moment, but we've still got a lot of lines available. So we'll start with the most important players first and work our way down. I think Luka Doncic, I think that's a fair starting point. His points prop in this game is 32.5 points. His matchup's not good nor bad against the Cleveland Cavaliers. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10, scored 39 points the last time they played. That was a home game at Dallas. Prior to that, in Cleveland, he only scored 30 points. Looking at his assist prop, his line is at 8.5. He's covered this in 7 out of his last 10. The Cavs allow the second fewest assisted point guards on the season. Luka Doncic has struggled in the past, getting only 6 assists the last 2 games against the Cleveland Cavaliers. His rebound prop's at 8.5, and he has rebounded quite well lately. He's hit this line in 6 out of his last 10. Difficult matchup, but against the Cavs in the past, he's gone under. So 5 and 7. So I guess if you wanted to get tricky with it, you could potentially look at an under in his assists, rebounds, and assists. That line's at 7. He has hit that in 6 out of his last 10 games, though. He does have a difficult matchup for both, and he's obviously struggled against Cleveland in the past. This game where he had 6 assists and 7 rebounds was earlier this season, end of December, I believe. So if you want to fade Luka, you could probably look at that. Jumping over to my man Kyrie Irving. So playing against the team that drafted him, his point line's at 26.5. He's covered it in 3 straight, 4 out of his last 10 games. The matchup with Cleveland is a difficult one. In head-to-head matchups, he actually hasn't versed Cleveland since he moved to the Dallas Mavericks, believe it or not. Looking at his assist prop, the line's at 4.5. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10, has gone under in 2 straight, and he's got a difficult matchup. Rebounds, I know he has been rebounding quite well. The line's at 4.5. Look at this. His line was sitting at 5.5 in the last game against Indiana. Does have a difficult matchup, but he has hit this in 9 out of his last 10 games. I think if the odds are a bit better, if this was a minus 110, I'd probably snap it up straight away because I've known Kyrie's been getting some boards. 4.5, a 90% hit rate over his last 10 games. Check this out. 80% hit rate over his last 20. So he's been rebounding the ball extremely well. And at 4.5, this might still be worth taking. It is a difficult matchup, but I think this is one that would definitely make my short list. I'm interested in looking at PJ Washington, although Josh Green, very capable of getting some buckets. So you can get his line at 7.5 or 8.5. If you look at the 7.5, he's covered in 9 of his last 10. The 8.5, he's covered in 8 of his last 10 games. He does have a great matchup with the Cavs, allowing the 7th most points to small forwards on the season. Josh Green only scored 2 points the last time he played the Cavs, played 21 minutes and took 4 shot attempts. Now, his last 10 games, he's playing almost 30 minutes and he's shooting the ball 8.5 times. He's making 51% of his 3-pointers. So working outside of Luka and Kyrie, he is being left wide open. Look at his 3-pointers. The Cavs actually allow the 7th fewest 3-pointers made, but you can see Josh Green's covered his 3-point line. Geez, you get that at plus 175. That's not too bad. But he's covered this in 8 of his last 10 games, which is pretty juicy. So Josh Green, I honestly don't mind him here. 8.5. You need 3 3-pointers. He's already averaging 2 3-pointers a game. He could drive the ball. He can get some easy buckets on the break. He could make a free throw or 2. So, and the Cavs are a great defensive unit, but Kyrie and Luka are going to command a lot of attention. So I'm going to put Josh Green points on my short list here. Not bad at all. His rebound prop and assist prop, I don't think I'd be too interested in that. Let's have a quick look. Line's at 2.5. He's covered in 6 of his last 10. He's got a good matchup. The line is heavily juiced, but he did have 3 rebounds the last time he versed Cleveland. So you might even look at points and rebounds for him. I'm not going to look at his assist prop, but points and rebounds, you're looking at 11.5, but he's covered that in 7 out of his last 10. He's got a great matchup for both. I really think the points prop is the way to go. The rebound prop, he doesn't cover that as well as I would like. So, yeah, definitely the points prop is what I'd look further into there for Josh Green, but I'll leave you guys to make your own decisions. Looking at the Cleveland Cavaliers, Donovan Mitchell, his points prop is at 24.5. He's got an excellent matchup. He's covered this in 8 out of his last 10 games. Against the Dallas Mavericks, he's had a bit of success. He's covered it in 2 consecutive games. Both of these were in 2022, though, so it has been quite some time. So I'd probably lean more heavily on the matchup and how he's performed recently. And he's performed quite well, I must say. He went under against Washington, played 36 minutes. He only attempted 10 shots. So the games he went under against Toronto and Washington, he barely shot the ball. And what you can see in both of these games, they beat the Toronto Raptors by 25, 26 points. They beat the Washington Wizards by only 9, but he only attempted 10 shots in that game. I think Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen were quite dominant in that game. They may not have it so easy against the Dallas Mavericks. So, yeah, Donovan Mitchell points. Actually not a bad play. Looking at his assists, the line's at 5.5. He's covered inside of his last 10. He doesn't have a bad matchup. Against the Dallas Mavericks, he's gone under in both games. Looking at his rebound prop, that's at 4.5, covering in 5 of his last 10. He's got an excellent matchup for rebounds. He has gone under in his last 2 against Dallas. So for Donovan Mitchell, definitely the points is what I'd be leaning towards the most. But do your own research. Let's have a look at Jarrett Allen. His points prop is at 18.5. You can get that for plus money. The Mavs, actually, they're the 9th fewest points to centers on the season, so they've done quite well, to my surprise. He's hit this in 5 of his last 10, scored 24 points the last time he came up against Dallas, but he did go under in the 2 games prior. His rebound props at 10.5, minus 128. Matchup's not good or bad. He's covered in 3 out of his last 10 games. And against Dallas, he had 23 rebounds the last time they played, and then 15 rebounds the game prior to that. So Jarrett Allen has had some very big games against the Dallas Mavericks in the past. Does that continue? I'm not too sure, but I do like what I'm seeing on the rebound front. I think what I would look into when you're looking at the box score of this game is what I encourage you to do. Check to see, did Evan Mobley play? Actually, don't worry about that. I'll check for you. Let's check games with Evan Mobley. So what we can see is, so Evan Mobley played this rebound game 15. When he got 23 rebounds, Evan Mobley wasn't playing. So with Evan Mobley, you'd assume he's not going to get as many rebound opportunities. 10.5, though, you might still be willing to take that. Speaking of Evan Mobley, let's jump into this guy. His line is at 14.5. He's covered this in 4 out of his last 10 games. Got a great matchup against Dallas. Against Dallas, scored 17 points the last time he played them. That was back in 2022. His rebound prop at 8.5. You can get that for plus money. He's got a good matchup for rebounds. Has gone under the last 2 times he played Dallas, but he has hit in 7 out of his last 10 games. And looking at his assist prop, the 2.5 plus money. He's hit in 5 of his last 10. He's got a great matchup, and he's gone over his assist prop the last 2 games against the Dallas Mavericks. So I do like a lot of what we're seeing here. Evan Mobley does have a good matchup. The odds for a lot of his props are pretty good. Let's just check his PRA real quick. The line's at 24.5. Outliers calling this out as a plus EV play. He's hit this in 8 of his last 10 games, and he's hit this in both of his games against Dallas. So Evan Mobley PRA, perhaps. He's got a great matchup for every single prop. Let me just check. Let me take note of that. So the problem here is I don't think Jarrett Allen scores a lot, but he could get a lot of rebounds. Mobley has a good matchup to get all of these. Donovan Mitchell's performed quite well scoring the ball. So if Darius Garland has good numbers too, then it might be difficult to pick somebody from Cleveland, right? If everybody has a great matchup. So let's look at Garland. His line's at 17.5, which is covered in 3 out of his last 10. He's got a difficult matchup against the Dallas Mavericks. He did score 18 points the last time they played, covering in 1 of his last 2. Assist prop is at line 6.5. He's covered this now in 7 consecutive games, which is pretty wild. Head-to-head matchups, he had 12 assists the last time he played the Dallas Mavericks. So, yeah, I think if he's going to be passed on the rock like this, Evan Mobley, Donovan Mitchell probably find themselves scoring a lot more points. If I find that a lot of my picks in this game, they correlate, I might even do a same-game parlay in this one. But, yeah, I don't mind what we're seeing here for Darius Garland. This recent form is pretty good. 6.5 might get a little bit sweaty, but you might feel confident. You might take him for 6 points. You might take Evan Mobley for 10. You might take Donovan Mitchell for 20 or so. We'll see. Up to you guys. Just sharing the numbers for you. Other than that, let's jump into the next game. It's the New Orleans Pelicans versus the New York Knicks. So in this particular game, CJ McCollum, Zion Williamson, they're game time decisions. And for the Knicks, the same players that are out. So we've got limited markets available at the moment. Knicks are on a back-to-back in this game. So let's jump into these Pelicans players first. So interestingly enough, Zion, Brandon Ingram props are available, but Zion's a game time decision. If Zion and CJ McCollum aren't good to go, you might see some value if you can still get a bet on Brandon Ingram. But let's check Zion out. Points prop, 22.5. He's got a decent matchup. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10, and he scored 24 points the last time he played the Knicks. That was at the start of the season. Looking at his rebound prop, it's 5.5. He's covered in 5 of his last 10. He's got a difficult matchup. Only had 5 rebounds the last time he played the Knicks. And his assist prop is also at 5.5 because he's been passing the ball like a demon lately. Last 4 games, he's been killing it. He's covered in 5 of his last 10. The matchup's not good or bad, but he only had 2 assists the last time he versus New York Knicks. Checking out Brandon Ingram, his points prop is 21.5. He's covered this in 5 out of his last 10. He's got a difficult matchup against the Knicks. And the last time he played the Knicks, he scored 26 points, but 2 games prior, 18 and 19 points. Jumping to his assist prop, that is at 6.5. You can get that for plus money. He's covered this in 4 out of his last 10. The matchup's not good or bad. And against the Knicks, he's covered it in 1 out of his last 3. I'd be interested to know how well he's played without Zion and CJ McCollum, if he has played many games without both of them. So looks like it's 4 games. 4 games from 2023 onwards. He's only covered 1 out of 4. So not the most erotic lines that you would have expected. His rebound prop, he's gone under in 4 straight. The line's at 4.5, and he's got a difficult matchup. He's covered it the last 2 times he's versus the New York Knicks, though. So none of the Pelicans lines are screaming out to me. Let's jump into the Knicks. Jalen Brunson just had a big game, 35 points. His points props at 31.5. He's got a somewhat difficult matchup in this one, but he has hit this in 6 out of his last 10. He has struggled in the past against the Pelicans, 14 and 20 points. No Julius Randle, though, so he's clearly going to get more opportunities. I would obviously I'll probably lean to the under in this one, purely because he is on a back-to-back. He's logging heavy minutes every single night against a Pelicans team who's probably going to put Herb Jones on him potentially to slow him down. Jose Alvarado's a pest. So I don't know if Jalen Brunson would need to score 30 or be able to score 31 points in this, but I'll definitely lean to the under. Get his assist prop. That line is at 6.5. He's covered this in 7 out of his last 10. Difficult matchup. But in head-to-head matchups against the Pels, he's gone under in both games. And his rebound prop, that's at 3.5. He's covered in 3 out of his last 10. Difficult matchup. And he's covered in 1 of his last 2 against the Pelicans. So I don't love any overs for Jalen Brunson in this one. I know I just took him for overs in points and assists, but I'm not feeling it right here. Dante DiVincenzo, his line is at 15.5. He's got a good matchup against the Pels. I think if the Pels, their weak points are shooting guards and centers, from what I remember. Points prop 15.5. He's hit in 8 of his last 10. He's got a good matchup. And in head-to-head matchups, he scored 5 points the last time they played, but he only played 19 minutes and took 7 shot attempts. So I would honestly lean to the over on this one purely because of the matchup. He's in a new role. He's getting new opportunities. He's still playing it. He's seen a reduction in his minutes. He's shooting between 12 and 15 shots in his reduced role. If he's taking 12 to 15 shots, but a lot of those are 3-pointers. Look at that. 5, 4, and 4 3-pointers made. I think there's a good chance that he can cover this 15.5. So I'd probably lean to the over for Dante. His assist props at 3.5. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10. He's got a great matchup. Only 1 assist in limited action against the Pels last time. And his rebound props also at 3.5. 5 of his last 10 had 4 against the Pelicans the last time. So given the good matchup in assists and points, could you look at his points plus assists? Let me check that out real quick. Where is it? Points plus assists. That line's at 19.5. More than capable of covering that in points alone. He's covered this line in 7 of his last 10. Obviously, didn't get stuff done against the last time against the Pelicans, but look, he's only hit this in 1 of his last 3, and in those 3 games, he has seen reduced minutes. So even against Boston, he only made 4 3-pointers and nothing else, but he does have a good matchup today. So I'd probably lean to the over for Dante, but something I'd need to investigate a little bit further. I'm looking at Josh Hart. Josh Hart has been playing quite well lately. He's been scoring the ball, believe it or not. He's got a difficult matchup, but he's covered in 6 out of his last 10, but he's covered in 4 out of his last 5 games. In head-to-head matchups, he has gone under in 2 out of his last 3 against the Pelicans. His assist prop, it's rather inconsistent, but he's hit in 5 of his last 10. The matchup's not good or bad, and he's gone under in all games against the Pels. And his rebound prop is where he's really excelled. He's got a difficult matchup. He's covered this in 1 of 3 games against the Pelicans. He has gone under in his last 2, but prior to that, covering very well, covering in 7 of his last 10 games. So this probably will be a game where I don't take a Josh Hart rebound prop. I've been taking it for quite some time. He's playing 40-plus minutes a night. He might be tired on a back-to-back, but he's attempting a lot of shots as well, taking a few three-pointers as well. So a lot of teams are leaving Josh Hart open, and it seems like he's taking advantage of it as of late. Precious Achiuwa, he's probably becoming their number 1 rebounder for the New York Knicks at the moment. But looking at his points prop, he's covered in 6 of his last 10. He's got a very difficult matchup when it comes to scoring. But looking at his rebound prop, that line is still at 9.5. He's now covered in 4 of his last 5 games. The matchup isn't an easy one, but it's not a hard one either. I'd probably lean to the over again. But Precious Achiuwa only played 33 minutes against Detroit. I'd probably lean to the, especially if Zion's not there. If Zion's playing, it might be a little bit difficult for him, if you know what I mean. But yeah, I'd wait to see what the lineups are before I make my final picks on this game. All right, we're looking at the 76ers versus the Boston Celtics. No game time decisions in this one, so a lot of props are available at the moment. So let's start off with these Philadelphia 76ers. We'll kick it off with Tyrese Maxey. So you can get his line at 25.5 or 26.5 at the moment. But he's covered this in 4 out of his last 10. He does have a good matchup. The Celtics don't defend point guards very well. And Tyrese Maxey, last 13 games against the Boston Celtics, he's only covered this once. So there's been a lot of action. The division rivals, playoff matchups, and the lot. But Tyrese Maxey has struggled against the Boston Celtics in the past. Looking at his assist prop, the line's at 5.5. The matchup's not good or bad. He's covered in 5 of his last 10. And he's gone under this assist line in every single game against the Boston Celtics. Keeping in mind, some of these might be playoff games, so make sure you research that in full. Tyrese Maxey, based on what I'm seeing, I'm not saying take the under. I'm just not game enough to take the over. Buddy Hield, his points prop is 12.5. He's covered this in 7 of his last 10. He's really started to see a reduction as of late. The matchup for Buddy Hield is a difficult one. The Celtics allowing the 4th fewest points to shooting guards. He's yet to play the Celtics since he's joined the 76ers. And we're seeing a reduction in his minutes. Therefore, we're seeing a reduction in his, not his shot attempts, I'd say, but his shots made really starting to come down. Still pulling a lot from deep, but he hasn't been shooting the absolute best. So I think the line is just about right. But if Maxey's not scoring points, they've got to get buckets from somewhere else. Is that Buddy Hield, Tobias Harris? Is that Kelly Oubre Jr.? I'm not too sure. His assist prop, it has hit quite well as of late. There you go. So the line's at 3.5. He's got the hardest matchup in basketball when it comes to his assists. The Celtics allow the fewest assists to shooting guards, but he has covered this in 8 of his last 10 games, Buddy Hield, and you can get that 3.5 plus money, plus 124. So look, it's something I'm going to look further into. I'm not saying to take it, but definitely something I'm going to investigate a little bit further. All right. Who else we got? Tobias Harris. Let's check out my man Tobias. One of the guys I hate betting on, but sometimes I find myself betting on him. His line is 16.5, which is covered in 4 out of his last 10. He's got a somewhat decent matchup against the Celtics, though. In terms of the matchup with the Celtics, he's covered in 5 of his last 14. But when I look at the games without Joel Embiid, we can see he's only played 2 games against Boston without Embiid. He scored 18 and 14 points. So the line is probably right. I'm not game enough to take it for Tobias Harris. But let's check out his assist prop. His assist prop's at 3.5. It's plus money as well. No matter good or bad. And he has gone under in every single game against the Celtics. And looking at his rebound prop, that line's at 5.5. He's covered in 7 out of his last 10 games. And he's covered in 7 of 14 games against the Celtics. 2 games without Joel Embiid. He went under his rebound line both times. So no bets on Tobias Harris for me. But let's have a quick look at Paul Reed. Sometimes this guy can have some monster games. His points props at 8.5. He's got not a good matchup, but not a bad one either. 5 of his last 10, and he's covered in 3 of his last 12 against Celtics. Looking at his rebound prop, that is also at 8.5. He's covered that in 3 of his last 10, and only 1 of 12 games against the Boston Celtics. Limited minutes, I'm sure, averaging 12 minutes per game. So he's probably only played one game here where he played 37 minutes against the Celtics. He had 13 rebounds. In his last 10 games, he's averaging 27 minutes. So even that is an outlier. So Paul Reed, difficult to get a read on you, but the rebound matchup's a difficult one as well. Porzingis going to be dragging his ass outside of the paint all night. So I'd be hesitant to take that bet. Having a look at Drew Holiday, his points prop is at 11.5. Difficult matchup against Philly. He's hit in 6 of his last 10, but he has gone over in 3 consecutive games against the Philadelphia 76ers. Looking at his assist prop, that line is 7 out of his last 10. The line's 4.5. He's hit it in 6 consecutive games. Matchup isn't a hard one, and in head-to-head matchups with Philly, he's covered in 2 out of his last 3. Looking at his rebound prop, that line is 4.5. He's hit in 4 out of his last 10. The matchup's not an easy one, but he has rebounded quite well against Philly in the past. So points and rebounds, he's hit quite well against Philadelphia, but I'm not overly keen on Drew Holiday in this one. The Boston Celtics are a pretty deep team, a lot of contributors. So sometimes it can be hard to get some bets on them. But let's have a look at Derek White. And I'll probably just be interested in looking at his points and his prop. But he's capable of some big games, obviously. The line is 14.5. It's plus money. The matchup's not a difficult one. He's hit in 6 out of his last 10. He's hit in 7 of his last 14 games against the Philadelphia 76ers. But looking at his last 3 games, he's covered this line every single time. His assist prop, though, the line's at 3.5. He's covered this in 8 of his last 10 games. The odds are minus 150. He does have a good matchup for assists, though, and he's covered this in 3 consecutive games against Philly, 5 out of his last 14. So Derek White assists, I don't think that's a bad play. I wish the odds were a little bit better, though, so I wouldn't be considering that as a single play. Jaylen Brown, check out JB out. How bad was this guy in the dunk contest, I swear? He even put his hand up to do it again, so hopefully he doesn't. But he's covered this line of 19.5 in 5 out of his last 10 games. The matchup isn't a good one. And in head-to-head matchups, he's covered this in 9 of 12 games against the Philadelphia 76ers, though. So that is a pretty positive story. But his form over the last 10, it's not bad either, right? So it's a game where I could see Jaylen Brown going over, to be honest. But let's wait to see what Tatum looks like and his performances. Because if Tatum's not having a good game, Jaylen Brown's probably having a good one. So looking at his assist prop, it's at 3.5. He's got a difficult matchup. He's covered in 5 out of his last 10 and only in 5 of 12 against Philly. Looking at his rebounds prop, 5.5. He's hit this in 8 of his last 10 games. He's got an excellent matchup. And in head-to-head games against them, 5 of his last 12. I wouldn't put too much stock into the matchup, though, because Joel Embiid's not there anymore. Joel Embiid almost makes it impossible for the opposing center to get rebounds. He's not there. Chances are someone like Kristaps Porzingis probably has a better matchup than what we see on paper. Having a geese at Jason Tatum, his line is at 25.5. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10 games. Got a difficult matchup. He's gone under in 3 straight. Head-to-head matchups, he's covered in 6 out of his last 14 games against them. I say this every single time. I haven't put many Jason Tatum bets on, and I don't think I'm starting now. I don't think I might have put 1 point, maybe 2. I think we played Indiana. I would have bet he's over in points. But looking at his assist prop, the line's at 5.5. He's hit this in his last 12 games. The matchup isn't the easiest one, but it's not bad either. Has hit this in 7 out of his last 14. You can see he's had 4+ assists in 13 out of 14 games. So if you're looking at some alternates, 4+ assists seems very safe. So Jason Tatum assists, it's definitely not the worst pick out there. I don't mind that. His rebounds, the line's at 7.5. He's got a good matchup for rebounds, but again, Embiid's not playing. So I imagine centers might get more rebounds against Philly than they previously once had. He's hit this rebound prop in 5 out of his last 10. He's gone under in 3 straight, though. And against Philly in the past, he's rebounded quite well. 11 of his last 14. He's had 6+ rebounds in 14 consecutive games. So Jason Tatum, alternate rebounds, alternate assists. I don't mind that if you're probably looking at some same-game parlays. Jumping into Kristaps Porzingis, his points prop is at 19.5. He's covered this in 5 of his last 10 games. The matchup is a good one in terms of points. In head-to-head games against Philly, he's played the 1. He scored 29 points against them, so that's positive. Looking at his rebound prop, line's at 6.5. You're getting that for plus money. Difficult matchup for centers, but again, no Embiid. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10 games. The last time he versus Philly, he finished on 6 rebounds. So I think that requires some further investigation. You'd probably look at what the rebound numbers are against centers that Philly's allowed to centers. So you can use something like StatsMuse for that. That's a free tool. Check out all the center game logs against Philly, and you can see whether they've been rebounding quite well or not. If they have been feasting on Paul Reed, Kristaps Porzingis overs at plus money, you could be onto something. Jumping in the next game, it's the Utah Jazz versus the Atlanta Hawks. In this particular game, Trae Young is still out. Okongwu is still out as well. So we see another game of DeJounte Murray starting at point guard. But let's start off with these Utah Jazz. So Colin Sexton has been locking down this starting shooting guard spot for quite some time. He's got a good matchup when it comes to his points. His line's at 17.5. He's hit this in 7 out of his last 10 games. Against the Atlanta Hawks, he's gone under the last 2 times he's played them. But obviously, I think his role it's quite different now to what it was when they last played. So I wouldn't put too much stock into that. Looking at his assist prop, he's covered this in line of 6.5. He's covered it in only 4 of his last 10. The matchup isn't the easiest one out there, and he hasn't gotten any assists in his last 2 games against the Atlanta Hawks. His rebound prop is at 2.5, and he's covered this in 4 out of his last 10. So I don't think anyone would be looking at Colin Sexton rebounds, but maybe you're looking at an alternate line of 15 points for some parlays. Colin Sexton, probably not the worst pick out there. Having a look at Keontae George, I just want to check his points and assists. He's been locking down this starting spot. He's got a good matchup. He's covered his points prop in 5 out of his last 10 games. Hasn't played the Atlanta Hawks yet, but 5 out of his last 10 is not super convincing. Assist prop, his line's at 5.5. He's covered it in 4 out of his last 10 and 3 out of his last 5. But he does have a good matchup for both. You're getting plus money for that pick too. So John Collins, let's check out Johnny Collins. Laurie Markkinen starting at the 3 as well. So Hendricks has got a starting spot, but let's have a look at John Collins. He's covered this in 6 out of his last 10. The line's at 14.5. The matchup isn't the worst one, but it's not an easy one either. And he's covered in 1 of his last 2 against Atlanta, sorry. Actually, let me have a look here. Because he paid for both of these teams. So in this particular game, he was versing Utah. And I think in this game, he would have been versing Atlanta. Anyway, John Collins, I don't hate it, but I don't love it either. Given the amount of games on the board, I think there's something better that we could find. His rebound props at 9.5. He's covered this in 6 out of his last 10. This is a plus money play as well. The matchup isn't the most difficult one, but it's not an easy one either. But Atlanta are going to be missing Okongwu out there, so that's a big rebounder. They'll be out. 6 out of his last 10. He's covered 8+ rebounds in 9 of his last 10 games. I wouldn't put it past him to cover 8 rebounds, perhaps, if you're looking at something alternate. But yeah, not the worst play there for John Collins. And the last one, where is my man Lauri Markkinen? So he hasn't been playing that well lately, I imagine. Well, he's been playing okay. He just hasn't been covering this line. Line's at 23.5. And the matchup's not a bad one. He's covered this in 3 out of his last 10. And against the Atlanta Hawks, he's covered this in 2 consecutive games. His rebound prop is 8.5. He's covered this in 4 out of his last 10 and 1 of his last 2 against Atlanta. But wildly inconsistent old Laurie, so I wouldn't be overconfident taking him. Let's have a quick look at Jordan Clarkson. His points props at 16.5. Got a good matchup, but he's covered in 3 out of his last 10 games. And he's gone over this line both times against the Atlanta Hawks. His assists, the line's at 4.5. He's covered this in 5 out of his last 10 and 1 of his last 2 against Atlanta. Jumping into these Atlanta Hawks, let's start with DeJounte Murray. Another game without Trae Young, so a high usage rate for him. The line's at 24.5. He's covered this in only 2 of his last 10 games, but he did cover it in his last game. Matchup isn't an easy one for him. In head-to-head matchups, he's covered this in 1 of his last 2 against Utah. I think his assists and rebounds are probably the best picks to look at, given his increased usage rate. His line for assists is 8.5, though, and he's gone under this both of his games against Utah. He did have 11 assists the last game against Orlando. The matchup against Utah is even easier, so honestly, I'd probably lean to the over here. for DeJounte Murray assists, but it's a very small sample size. But we can go back and look at all his games without Trae Young, and we can check out the numbers. Check that out. So he's covered this in 6 out of his last 10 games with Trae Young off the court. He's got a great matchup. The Jazz allow the most assists to point guards on the season. Looking at the other teams, I know Portland's a difficult matchup. Milwaukee allow a lot of points, not assists. Sacramento Kings, that's not a hard matchup, and neither is the Warriors. So, look, he's got it done. Miami, that's a difficult matchup, and he had 11. So, I'd probably lean to the over for DeJounte Murray assists at 8.5, given Trae Young's not there. But let's have a look at his rebound prop. That's at 6.5. He's covered this in 3 straight, but only 4 of his last 10. He's got a good matchup. He's gone under his last 2 games against Utah, though. So I think DeJounte Murray going to do something wild. But let's check out. Who else do we have here? Check out Bogey. Bogdanovic. He's got the starting spot. Line's at 18.5. He went under in his prop against Orlando in the starting position, but he's covered in 2 out of his last 10. He doesn't have an easy matchup. He scored 8 points the last time he played Utah, so I'd be a bit hesitant to bet on that. Assist-wise, though, 6 assists the last time he played the Jazz, but in his last 10, he's covered this in 6 out of those games. So Bogdanovic, not super arousing, I'm sure. Sadiq Bey, points and rebounds. He usually does quite well in those. Let's see what the matchup's like. He's got a good matchup for points. He's covered his points prop in 6 out of his last 10 games, though. And looking at his rebound prop, that's at 5.5. He's covered this in 5 of his last 10 games. So not overly impressive, but I wonder how he plays without Trae Young, because Trae Young's the one dishing him the ball. 4 out of his last 10, he's gone over. So good matchup, but no Trae Young. I guess it means it's a bit harder for Sadiq Bey to score. But let's check out Jalen Johnson. His points props at 17.5. He's covered this in 5 out of his last 10 games. Every second game he seems to cover. Matchup is a great matchup. The Jazz allow a lot of points to power forwards on the season. Jalen Johnson struggled against the Utah Jazz the last 2 times he played. He did play 19 and 17 minutes. Didn't take many shots, but he shot terribly as well. So struggled against the Jazz in the past. He's in a different role now. I'm not sure if he continues to struggle. His assist prop is at 4.5, and I think that's highest. That is the highest that we've seen for Jalen Johnson. He has a good matchup against the Utah Jazz, though, covering in 4 out of his last 10 games. But at 4.5, I'd be a little bit hesitant to take. And his rebound prop, that's at 9.5. He's covered this in 6 out of his last 10 and in 3 consecutive games. The matchup isn't an easy one or a hard one, though. So Jalen Johnson, lines are quite high, I must say, but given the way that the team's pretty much put together at the moment, he's going to have to get active and get involved in it. Let's have a look at, I'm looking for Clint Capella, but his lines don't seem to be available at the moment. So no Clint Capella here. Just wanted to check his rebounds out, but those aren't available. Let's jump into the next one. Looking at the Charlotte Hornets versus the Milwaukee Bucks, Steph Curry, Davis Bertans, Giannis Antetokounmpo, all game time decisions in this game. A lot of props available at the moment, so we'll start with these Charlotte Hornets. Kick it off with Trae Mann. So I think the lines have started to catch him, but you could get him for decent value. So looking at his points prop, it's at 11.5. It's been at 11.5 for ages. Great matchup against the Bucks. Has only covered this in 2 out of his last 10, but check it out. He's only been with the Charlotte Hornets from here. So 6 games, 2 out of 6 games with the Charlotte Hornets. Good matchup. Looking at his activity, he's attempting 7, 8, 9 shots per game at the moment. So, and he's not shooting a high percentage either. So I'd be a bit reluctant to take his points prop, but he is playing a decent number of minutes. Assists, the Bucks it's a difficult matchup for him. He's covered this in 3 of his last 6 games, has gone under in 3 straight. And looking at his rebound prop, that's at half. He's been rebounding better than, I guess, his other props, you could say. Did it quite well as of late. Did go under again. So Trae Mann, I'd be a bit hesitant to take any of his picks at the moment. He seems to be trending in the wrong direction. And I did watch him play for the first time long ago, and I wasn't overly impressed by the way that he played. He got very frustrated, spent more time complaining to the referee. And I ain't about that life. If I need you to hit a certain prop and you're spending too much time complaining, I'm not going to fuck with you. So let's have a look at Cody Martin. The main thing I want to look at is rebound prop, because that's been hitting quite well as of late. Let's check that out. So his rebound prop's at 4.5, and it's still at plus money. You can get his rebound prop at plus money almost every single game. In terms of the matchup, it's a good one. The Bucks do allow rebounds to shooting guards. He's covered this in 7 out of his last 10, but 7 of his last 8, really. And last time he played the Bucks, got 5 rebounds in only 24 minutes. Looking over his last 5 games, he's playing 30 minutes per game. So he's getting the game time. I do like this one. I'm putting this on the short list, but he's getting the game time. His recent form is good, and he's done it against the Bucks before. Having a look at Brandon Miller. So Brandon Miller has struggled, to be honest. Line's at 18.5. He's covered in 4 out of his last 10. The matchup's not a good one. It's not a bad one either. Looking at head-to-head stats, he's gone under this line against the Milwaukee Bucks twice this season. Looking at his assist prop, that's at 2.5. Doesn't get those quite regularly, so I'm not going to waste your time with that. His rebound prop, 3.5. It's pretty juiced, though, minus 150. He's hit it in 8 out of his last 10. The matchup's not good or bad. And he's covered this both times against the Milwaukee Bucks. So, look, Brandon Miller rebounds, yeah, I think he does go over. But at those odds, would you play them as a single bet? I'm not too sure. Maybe as part of a parlay, perhaps, but I'm not interested in odds like that. Those are a bit too low for my liking. Miles Bridges, let's check out Bridges. Tough matchup. He's up against Giannis in this one. He's covered this in his lines of 20.5. He's covered this in 4 out of his last 10. Hasn't hit this against the Bucks though, and he does have a difficult matchup, so I'm not loving that. His rebound line is at 7.5. He's gone under both of these games against the Bucks this year, but he has rebounded well lately. 14, 11, and 10 in his last 3 games. So I did watch one of those games because I was busy watching Trey Mann, and Bridges was a beast. Talk about effort. There was a lot of effort to get rebounds, and I think there's still a good chance that he gets them. So I'll probably lean to the over, but I think there are better players on the slate. But I wouldn't just say take the under because he struggled against the Bucks in the past. That recent form is legit. He is exerting a lot of energy and effort to get these rebounds. And the next one is Nick Richards. He's got a good matchup against the Bucks here, and he's actually been hitting this quite well. Check that out. 7 out of his last 10 games, he's covered 10.5 points. You can get this at plus money as well, so I do like that. Up against the Bucks, he did score 16 points the last time they played, and Charlotte lost by almost 40 points. 36-point loss. Nick Richards still delivered with 16 points. He played 29 minutes, and he took 9 shots. So he would have got to the line at 7. He made 7, so that's 14 points. So he made a couple of free throws as well. So 9 shots in 29 minutes. Looking at his last 5 games, he's attempting 6.6 shots per game, which is not what you want to see. Shooting at a high percentage, 80%, which is great. And he's playing about 29 to 30 minutes a game. So we're only asking for 10.5 points here. And he's shooting them at an 80% clip. So if he's taking 6 or 7 shots in the game and he shoots at that percentage, it's likely he covers, right? So he does have a good matchup and he's done it before. So Nick Richards, you just made my short list, brother. All right, we're checking out these Milwaukee Bucks. We'll start with Giannis. Game time decision, but he should play. His line's at 29.5. He's covered this in 7 out of his last 10. Doesn't have the easiest matchup in the world, but it is a Charlotte Hornets, so they give up points anyway. Head-to-head matches, Giannis has struggled in his last 2, 16 and 15 points. In these games, the Bucks have absolutely monstered the Hornets, winning by 30-plus in 2 consecutive games. The blowout risk is definitely there. So in terms of points, probably, if it happens again, he's not going to score as many. But assists, I have a feeling he does well against them, because if he's not scoring, he's got to be doing something else, right? So he's hit this in 6 out of his last 10. In terms of the matchup, I can't see it at the moment, but here she comes. All right. It's not a bad matchup for his assists, but let's check the head-to-heads out. And he had 9 assists in one game, 3 assists in the other. So he didn't have to do too much at all, played only 23 minutes. I think if this game is close, Giannis has a big game, but chances are it's not going to be. The way that these two teams have been playing as of late, the line is 14.5 points. So there could be a 15 to 20-point win in this one. And Giannis at 29.5 points, I probably wouldn't take that at all. But looking at his rebound prop, he's covered in 4 out of his last 10, 2 out of his last 4 against them. So I honestly would be leaning a Giannis PRA under. Let's just quickly check that out, because the blowout factor is high. So he has covered this in 7 out of his last 10 games. So there might be accounting for a bit of a blowout here. But if we check the head-to-head, we know in these 2 games he played less than 30 minutes, right? So if there is a blowout, Giannis is probably going to play less than 30 minutes. So if we look at his last 10 games playing less than 30 minutes, check this out. Let's look at his last 20. So in his last 20 games where he plays less than 30 minutes, you can assume that these are blowouts or injuries. Let's just check it. Blowout, 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 blowout. This game's actually wasn't a blowout. That's a blowout, blowout. Yep. So mostly pretty much game. So if I'm assuming these two games he got injured because he did nothing in those, and maybe that one too. But what I'm calling out here in his last 20 games where Giannis has played less than 30 minutes, and you can assume that is a blowout, that he's failed to cover his PRAs. I'm not a big man of taking unders, but this could be a sweat-free bet. Given his history against the Hornets, the chance of a blowout. Bucks are playing quite well at the moment. The Hornets, probably not so much. I don't mind this. I'm going to add Giannis under PRAs to my short list. I'm doing it. Right, who else have we got? Dame Lillard. Let's have a look at this guy. His points line's at 25.5. The matchup's not an easy one, not a hard one either. He's gone under in 5 consecutive games. He's hit it in 3 of his last 10, but he has covered this line in both games against Charlotte. I would have guessed that given Giannis has gone under. So the matchup, even though it might be a more difficult one, Dame's delivered in the past. Been a bit quiet as of late, so I think the Bucks would like to see Dame rolling again. Looking at his assist prop, that line is at 6.5. He's been passing the ball quite well lately, covering in 6 of his last 10 and in 3 straight. He has a good matchup against the Hornets in terms of assists, and he had 8 and 5 assists the last 2 times that he's played them. Checking out his rebound prop, that is at 3.5, covered in 5 of his last 10, 3 consecutive games, and in both games against the Charlotte Hornets. So, yeah, Dame, I think he could have a big game. But again, I'm basing this of Giannis not having a big game. But the only player I'd probably look at here is Brook Lopez. Centers have an easy matchup against the Charlotte. Let's check him out. He hurt my feelings not too long ago. Covered this in 5 out of his last 10. The matchup is a good one. And against the Hornets, he's only covered in 2 out of his last 5. So not overly arousing there. And rebound-wise, he has rebounded well against the Hornets, covering 4 of his last 5 games. This line's only at 5.5 and it's plus money. 7 rebounds in both games against the Hornets this year. And Nick Richards isn't going to get far from the rim. Now, Lopez has only covered this in 3 out of his last 10. So you really got to get the right matchups going here. So Timberwolves is an awfully tough matchup. Philly doesn't have Embiid, so that might be on the easier side. Memphis is actually a good matchup because Jaren Jackson can't rebound to save his life. Miami, that's a difficult matchup. Adebayo. Denver's a difficult matchup with the Joker. Charlotte's an easy matchup when he's got that again. Minnesota's a difficult matchup. Portland is an easier matchup because they're shit. But in this game, Portland ended up winning. Denver's a tough matchup. And the Pelicans, that's actually an easy matchup, but the Bucks blew them out. So looking at this, I'd honestly consider taking Brook Lopez over rebounds, despite the form. Now, I could be completely wrong about this, and he could go well under, and that's because he's been playing shit lately and not getting rebounds, right? But for some reason, I've talked myself into this, but I'll add it to my short list. Check the pinned comment if you're interested in seeing what I land on. If it delivers, I'm a fucking genius, right? You're all going to be saying that, thinking that. If I don't, I'm a fucking idiot. But the thing is, if it does land, I'm still a fucking idiot. I just got lucky, and I need you to remember that. So Brook Lopez, over in rebounds. You got my attention, my boy. Let's jump into the next game. It's the Minnesota Timberwolves versus the San Antonio Spurs. Rudy Gobert is a game-time decision. I think he still has a sprained ankle. Victor Wembanyama has been killing it lately. So let's see what we can find in this game. Starting with the San Antonio Spurs. Devin Vassell has been playing quite well lately, but he has a very difficult matchup. And Edwards, a terrific defender on the ball. Vassell's hit this line of 7 out of his last 10 games. In head-to-head matchups, he's actually burnt the Timberwolves every single time. He's covered this in 4 consecutive games. So, difficult matchup, but he said, fuck your matchup. Eat this 20-piece, my boy. 4 consecutive games. He's been killing it lately. So, yeah, look, I'm a bit on the fence because I definitely respect Anthony Edwards and his ability to defend the ball. But the numbers are saying take the over. I'm not sure if I'm willing to take that, but that's what the numbers are saying. Looking at his assists, he's covered this in 6 out of his last 10 games. Difficult matchup, but he's done quite well against the Minnesota Timberwolves. So leaning to the over with his assists as well. Who else is there? Trey Jones. I'm done looking at you because I never even bet on you anyway. Let's check out Victor Wembanyama. So we'll check every single prop Victor has because he's absolutely filling it up. His points prop is at 21.5. Difficult matchup against the Timberwolves, but it's not so difficult if Rudy Gobert doesn't play. Looking at head-to-head matchups, he's covered this in 2 out of 3 games against the Timberwolves this season. An important thing to note, which I can see already, the 2 games that he's performed quite well, both of the games in San Antonio. The road game against the Minnesota Timberwolves, he only scored 12 points. This game is on the road up against the Minnesota Timberwolves. So I'd be a bit hesitant to take that. But in saying that, his last few games, they've been on a road trip, 5-game road trip so far. All on the road, and he's covered 4 out of the 5 of them. So I wouldn't be overly hesitant, but yeah, I'm not too sure about Wemby. His assist prop, that's at 3.5. Timberwolves, not a good or bad matchup. He's covered this in 5 out of his last 10, and he's covered it in 2 out of 3 games against the Timberwolves. So he didn't get assists very well in this game either. But he wasn't on a minutes restriction. He played 32 minutes in that game. So he just got shut down, and the Timberwolves only won that game by 8 points. So he just wasn't very effective. Looking at his rebound prop, that line is at 9.5. He's covered this in 7 out of his last 10 games. Difficult matchup, but he has rebounded quite well against the Timberwolves in the past, 9, 10, and 10. We're going to check his stocks. So he steals and blocks. That line's at 4.5. He's been killing it lately. What an absolute monster. So many steals and blocks. The Timberwolves don't get blocked that often, and they don't give up too many turnovers and steals, but he's hit this in 5 of 10, but 4 of his last 5. He's gone under in 2 or 3 games against the Timberwolves, so I'm not going to get overly excited about those. So Wemby, look, he might have an amazing game, but there's nothing in the numbers side of things that's screaming out to me to take the over. Let's have a look at the Minnesota Timberwolves. Let's have a look at Rudy Gobert just in case he does play. So we know that centers all across the league, they're getting up for these games against Wemby. The Spurs allow the most points to the center position in the league. Let's check to see if Rudy Gobert feels the same way. So he's covered this line in 6 of his last 10. You're looking for 15 points, you can get him plus money. Against the Spurs, he's covered it in 2 out of the 3 games this season. So the last 2 games against the Spurs, he's covered it. Prior to that, he wasn't interested. But last 2 games, he has been getting a pumping. And rebound-wise, that line's at 13.5. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10. And against the Spurs, he's only hit this in 1 of his last 7. Had 1 game with 20 rebounds, but it looks like no one could make shots in that game. Following game, he only had 7. But look, I won't be taking any bets on Rudy Gobert, even if he does play. I've made the mistake on betting someone who is a game-time decision, and it's absolutely did my ass in. I'm not a big fan of that. Let's have a look at Ant-Man. Anthony Edwards, his points prop is at 27.5. He's covered this in 4 straight games now. He's got a good matchup. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10. Head-to-head matchups against the Spurs, 4 of his last 7, 2 out of 3 games this season. So I'd probably lean to the over in that one, but I don't bet on Anthony Edwards too much. Somewhat inconsistent, but Anthony Towns can also have some big games. Looking at his assists, the line's at 5.5. He's covered in 4 of 7 games against the Spurs. He's got a good matchup. And in his last 10, he's only covered it 3 out of 10 games. So again, this one I'd probably lean to the over because of the matchup and shit like that. But pace of the game should be somewhat high. But again, Anthony Edwards, I don't have too much confidence in taking bets on him. Rebound-wise, lines at 5.5. 6 of his last 10. He's got a good matchup. And he's rebounded well in 3 games against the Spurs this season. 7, 7, and 6. So given that, I'd probably lean to the over. But it's Anthony Edwards, right? I'm a big fan of him as a bump player, but when it comes to betting on his props, I ain't too interested. Karl Anthony Towns, check out this boy. Doesn't have an easy matchup, but he's covered in 5 out of his last 10 games. And against the Spurs, he's gone under in 2 out of the 3 games this season. Rebound prop, his line's at 8.5. He's covered in 4 out of his last 10. And against the Spurs, he's covered in 4 of his last 7, covering in 2 out of his last 3. So nothing in that is jumping out to me. I personally don't love this game too much. If you're just looking at the numbers standpoint, Devin Vassell probably got the most convincing numbers. Difficult matchup, but those numbers yelling out to me. Gobert points, they're screaming out to me. Nothing on Wemby, to be honest, because the Gobert thing's a little bit tricky. But yeah, I think there are better plays out there. So let's jump into the next one. It's the Detroit Pistons versus the Chicago Bulls. So Isaiah Stewart is a game-time decision after his suspension, but we've got limited markets at the moment until we know whether Stewart's playing or not. Let's look into Cade Cunningham first, then we'll jump into Jalen Duren. Cunningham's line has finally moved. It's been stuck on 21.5 for ages. He's had 3 great games. It's now at 22.5, but he has a difficult matchup against the Bulls. They allow the fewest points to point guards on the season. Cade's covered in 4 of his last 10 and 1 of his last 2 against the Bulls. His assist prop is at 7.5. It's plus money. He's hit that in 5 of his last 10. The matchup's not good nor bad, but he's covered this in 1 of his last 2 against the Bulls. So I'm not overly interested in betting on Cade Cunningham today, but you might be. Let's have a look at Jalen Duren. His points line, 13.5. He's covered this in 5 out of his last 10 games. Matchup's not good or bad. Against the Bulls, he scored 23 points the last time they played. That's the only time he's versed them this season, I believe. So Jalen Duren had a strong outing in that game. Rebound-wise, his line's at 10.5. He's put together some monster games. He's covered this in 7 out of his last 10. The matchup is somewhat difficult, but Duren, he's rebounded quite well against the Chicago Bulls in the past. So I might be siding with Jalen Duren here and say, fuck the matchup. I don't care how hard it is. I've eaten against you boys in the past. I've been eating quite well as of late. The line in this game is 11 points to the Chicago Bulls, though. So if that does come true and they blow the socks off them, it might be difficult for Duren to get these rebounds. So definitely a lean for Duren at the moment. I'm not going to add him to my short list. I haven't been aroused by any of the picks that I've seen in this game yet, so we shall see. Let's have a look at the Chicago Bulls, though. Kobe White, his points prop is at 22.5. He's got an excellent matchup here. He's covered in 4 out of his last 10 games, but against the Chicago Bulls, he's gone under in every single game. Looking at his assist prop, that's at 5.5 plus money. Good matchup. 6 out of his last 10 he's covered in, but he's covered in 1 of his last 6 against Detroit. And looking at his rebound prop, 4.5, which is covered in 6 of his last 10. Difficult matchup. Head-to-head, he's gone under in every single one. So, yeah, I would have expected better performances from Kobe White against the Pistons because of the matchups usually pretty good, but he has struggled. Now, Ayo Dosunmu, I wouldn't normally look at his props, but he's been playing quite well, so I can't ignore him. His line's at 14.5. He's hitting 6 out of his last 10. The matchup's not a good one or a bad one, but he's gone under in every game against the Pistons. I'm looking at his assist prop, though. He's covered this in 5 out of his last 10, but he's got 8 assists 2 consecutive games in a row. Head-to-heads, he's gone under in every single game. So I don't know if the Bulls have changed something as of late, recently, but Dosunmu's been quite productive, so we shall see. DeMar DeRozan, he's actually been playing quite well lately. I did bet on him not too long ago, and he delivered against the Pelicans, so I was pretty happy with that. My hate towards DeMar DeRozan has somewhat diminished, but looking at his points prop of 23.5, he's covered this in 8 of his last 10 games. He's got a good matchup against the Pistons, and in head-to-head matchups, he's covered this in 2 out of his last 6. His assist prop, though, that's been going quite well. He's covered this line of 4.5 in 7 of his last 10. And against the Pistons, he's covered in 4 out of his last 6, but he has gone under in his last 2. So I'm a bit hesitant to take DeRozan on that one. Nikola Vucevic, his points props at 19.5. He's got a pretty good matchup. He's covered this in 8 out of his last 10 games. Head-to-head matchups, he's only covered in 1 of 6, but the one game he did cover just happened to be the last game he played against them. Rebound-wise, the line's at 11.5. The matchup's not bad. He's covered in 5 of 10, 2 of his last 6 against them. So, yeah, I'm not feeling Nikola Vucevic either. To be honest, in this game, I'm not really feeling any of them. So I don't even think I could find something for same-game parlays, but I'll leave that up to you guys if you choose to play them. Jumping into the latest games on the slate, first one we're looking at is the Miami Heat versus the Portland Trail Blazers. Now, again, the Miami Heat, a lot of players, game-time decisions in this one. I think, well, who is it? Terry Rozier's a game-time decision. Tyler Hero, Thomas Bryant, Jimmy Butler, Jovic, Richardson, Orlando Robinson, they're all out. So a lot of players who are game-time decisions. The Miami Heat played well. They got the win in the last matchup against the Kings, but they are on a back-to-back. And for the Portland Trail Blazers, they've got a lot of well, most notably Brogdon, Scoot Henderson, Shaedon Sharpe, long-term injury. So only 3 props available at the moment, and they're all for the Portland Trail Blazers. So let's get through all 3 of those. First one is Anthony Simons. His points prop is 22.5. He's gone under in 4 straight. He's covered in 4 out of his last 10. Difficult matchup against the Heat. Head-to-head matchup, scored 25 points the last time they played back in 2022. His assist props at 5.5. He's covered this in 5 of his last 10. but he's struggled to get the assist off against the Miami Heat. So I'm not loving that. Let's check out DeAndre Ayton. His points prop is at 17.5. Difficult matchup against Bam Adebayo, though. So I think Bam just held Domantas Sabonis to 14 points today. So DeAndre Ayton, difficult matchup, but he has covered this line quite well. 8 out of his last 10 games. But I think looking at these 10 games, the Minnesota Timberwolves is probably the only one that's been difficult. The Chicago Bulls, 76ers, Milwaukee Bucks, Denver Nuggets, Pelicans, and the Charlotte Hornets again. They're all easy matchups for centers. The Minnesota one, that was a very strong performance. But I remember looking at that one, he shot like 90%, and then he backed it up against Minnesota and only scored 2 points. So I think his recent form, I would say, is inflated given the easier matchup. Difficult matchup against the the Miami Heat in this one. I'd probably lean to the under, if I'm being honest. But looking at his rebound prop, that line's at 10.5. The matchup is not too bad for that, but he's covered this in 5 out of his last 10. But just sharing my thoughts on that. Jeremy Grant, points props at 21.5. He's covered this in 5 out of his last 10. The matchup for Jeremy Grant, not an easy one at all. Now, head-to-head matchups, did score 23 points against Miami the last time they played, but that was back in 2022. So, yeah, not feeling the prop for any of these three. Let's jump into the last one. And then I'll start diving into these in my own time and put some pinned comments on what I ultimately land on. No game time decisions in this game. So a lot of props to get through. Let me sip on some water and let's get into it. All right, let's look at these Houston Rockets first. Starting off with Fred VanVleet. Points prop, it's 15.5. The matchup's not a good one or a bad one. He has had 2 strong games, scoring 20-plus points in his last 2. 4 of his last 10. Scored 20 points the last time he versed OKC. Covering in 1 or 2 games. Assist prop is at 6.5. It's plus money, but he's gone under in 6 consecutive games now. He's hit in 3 of his last 10. Head-to-head matchups, only 3 assists the last time he played OKC. So Fred VanVleet definitely on my not on my people to look into. Jalen Green, this guy's inconsistent as hell. He's covered in 3 out of his last 10 games. Has an excellent matchup though against OKC. 3 of his last 10, but he's gone under in 4 consecutive games against OKC. Assist-wise, lines at 3.5. He's covered this in 5 of his last 10. Another good matchup, and he's covered this in 3 of his last 5. Rebound prop. He has games where he gets 10 rebounds, but there's a game of 14 rebounds, but he's only hit in 3 of his last 10. So highly inconsistent. Has had 7 rebounds in 2 consecutive games against OKC, but yeah, this recent form's a little bit cray-cray for me. So fan of taking that. Who else is there? Dylan Brooks. Let's look at his points prop. His line's at 12.5. He's covered this in 6 out of his last 10 games. Scored 13 points the last time he versed OKC. But OKC, that's a difficult matchup when it comes to points. Coming into the OKC Thunder players, though, let's look at SGA. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. His point drops at 31.5. When isn't it? He's got a difficult matchup, but he did score 36 points against the Houston Rockets last time. 4 out of his last 10, and he's covered this in 4 out of his last 6 games against Houston. Assist prop is at 6.5. He's covered this in 7 out of his last 10 games. The matchup's meant to be a difficult one, and he's covered this in 1 of his last 6. Rebounds for SGA, we can see that line's at 5.5. He's covered this in 4 of his last 10. Difficult matchup, and he's gone under 5 out of 6 games against the Houston Rockets. So not loving what I'm seeing for SGA so far. The next one is Josh Giddey. I haven't had much success betting on Giddey this year, but let's have a look at it. Points prop, 5 out of his last 10. Difficult matchup, and only scored 2 points against Houston last time. Played Houston twice this season, and he's gone under in both games. Looking at his assist prop, the line's at 3.5 plus money. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10. He's got a difficult matchup, but against the Rockets, he's actually covered this in 5 consecutive games. So that is interesting. You got my attention now, Mr. Giddey. Even in these games where he's playing 23 to 25 minutes, he's managed to produce the assists. The matchup isn't the easiest one, but if you only need 4 assists and you're going to get plus money for it, I don't mind this. I don't mind this at all. So the Clippers is a difficult matchup, but Utah, Dallas, Washington, they're actually easy matchups, and he hasn't delivered. He's got a difficult matchup today, but we see here that some of these games, that's a difficult matchup too, and Josh Giddey's got it done. So 4 assists for Josh Giddey. I don't mind that, my boy. Let me put you on my short list, and I'll investigate you a little bit later. All right, who else have we got here? Let's check out J-Dub, Jalen Williams. His points prop is at 19.5. The matchup's a good one against Houston in terms of points. He did score 22 points the last time they played. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10. That last game was the first time he's covered his line. So previously he struggled. Got it cracking against them last time. Looking at his assists, the line is 4.5. He's covered this in 7 of his last 10 and got 5 assists the last time he played the Rockets. Good matchup. So now covered this in 2 of his last 6. And rebound-wise, his line's at 4.5. 2 out of his last 10, though. Only 4 rebounds against the Rockets. Prior to that, was rebounding quite well. So I'll be honest with you. I'm a little bit hesitant to take a bet on this game because these guys just played each other, right? Similar to the playoff series, both teams are going to make their adjustment. So I wouldn't surprise me if the Houston Rockets make adjustments to potentially slow Jalen Williams down. And then I also won't be surprised if the Thunder make adjustments to try to slow this guy down because Jabari Smith just scored 20 points in them. His line's at 13.5. The matchup's a difficult one, but he absolutely torched them, right? In head-to-head matchups, he's hit this in 3 of his last 6. I think he had a big rebounding game too. Line's at 9.5. Yep. 17 rebounds against OKC, 16 rebounds the game prior. Has now had 2 consecutive games with monster rebound efforts against OKC. So that could be an interesting play, but yeah, I'm a little bit hesitant given the back-to-back nature of this game. I wouldn't be surprised if someone who sucked suddenly goes off. Alperen Şengün, 19.5. He's hit this in 3 of his last 10. Doesn't have a bad matchup, but against OKC, he's only hit this in 2 of his last 6. Rebound-wise, his line is 9.5. Got 12 rebounds his last matchup against OKC, so he's covered in 4 of his last 6. He's got a great matchup. In his last 10, he's covered this in 6 out of his last 10 games. And then looking at his assist prop, the line's at 4.5. 5 out of 10. Great matchup. And against OKC, he's only covered in 2 out of his last 6. So I wouldn't be taking a Şengün prop unless Fred VanVleet is missing. This is a difficult game for me given they just played. And that's one of the other lessons that I've learned. Just because they did it just before doesn't mean it's going to happen again. So, yeah, I'd personally be quite hesitant to bet on this game. But let me zoom this thing out. What's up, y'all? It's good to see you all again. Look, a lot of games. There's 11 games. There's a lot of action. Got a lot of players to look into a little bit further, but I'll have my pinned comments hopefully an hour out after I upload this video. I'll probably have a same game parlay or 2. Those have actually been hitting quite well for me. But look, we just hit 5.2 units profit. Hopefully with the bigger slate of game, my deeper dives. When I share some leans as well, I'll explain to you the reasons why I'm not taking them. Just to give you a little bit of context. It doesn't mean that they're not going to hit, but if there's a risk involved, I want to call that out for you guys. But look, best of luck if you decide to tell, or best of luck if you've used this research to make your own picks. If you want to do your own research, I strongly suggest you jump into outlier.bet. And you can do exactly what I'm doing on these videos, but you can do it in your own time. You can take your own time with it. You can dive a little bit deeper to ultimately find your own picks, because I've been betting for 10 years now. I don't know what it is, but it's been a very long time. And through that 10-year journey, I've followed a lot of other bettors. I've paid for tips in the past. I've had subscriptions. I've lost on them. I felt like shit for doing it. Ultimately, I learned I'm going to create this channel. I'm going to create this Discord. I'm going to level up my own skills. I'll find my own bets. I even created a sports betting coaching program when I taught other people how to find their own bets. And I tell you, there is no better feeling than doing your own research, finding your own pick with your own reasons why. You share that with your mates, you share that with the group, and then that lands and you feel like an absolute god, because that is all you. You're not relying on somebody else to give you that information, because when you follow somebody else's bet and that loses, who do you really have to blame? There's a part of you that hates the other person for giving you that shit bet, but you also start to hate yourself because you didn't do your own research, right? So I want to strongly encourage you guys to do your own research. Download a tool like Outlier. Start cranking, reach out to me on Discord or even on a YouTube comment if you have any questions or if you need any help, and I'll do my absolute best to help you. If you do want to see more content I'm making, then just click on this video right here. Just click on it. You can watch me all night, baby. But I'll see you guys in the next one. Be good to your mothers, your daughters, your brothers, your sisters. Just be good to each other. Now, gamble responsibly, but not really. Peace.
Sub to the channel cause your boy's getting busy. Coming to you live from the west side of Sydney. We've got the free picks and the juice on the daily. It's all free, you don't even have to pay me.